Forest crashed out of the Premier League. Relegated managers usually expect to be booed off the field. Clough got an ovation, a mark of respect for a man whose past successes were beyond question and whose high-octane charisma had made him a folk hero.
If you've got the best dictator the world's ever produced, and if he happened to be right, there's nothing the matter with him. But I would love to be the perfect dictator.
Brian Clough's brash personality made waves beyond the world of football. In the International Big Mouth League, he was a real contender.
There's some fella named Brian Clough, some soccer player or something. Anyway, I heard that this fella talks too much. Whoever you are, I'm the talker. Now, Clough, I've had enough. Stop it.
But in football, Clough made many enemies. Combative, self-assured, vocal, he had a knack of turning a crisis into all-out war.
If you ask me, I should be Chancellor and I should be Prime Minister too. And then this country would be as good a country as Nottingham Forest or a football team.
I didn't set out to create an image. It was just me. You get what you see with me, and you get what you hear.
Brian Clough grew up in Middlesbrough. In post-war industrial Britain, working-class men were expected to end up in local factories, especially if, like Brian Clough, you failed your 11 plus. But the young Clough had a way out. His exceptional talent as an amateur footballer set him apart.
He was lippy at school. He wasn't disrespectful as such, because he was too well brought up by his family to be that, but he knew very well that he had a destiny somewhere else. He knew that he was good, particularly good at one facet of life, and he homed in on it very early. And as a result, this lacerating self-confidence, this blast furnace of an ego, it just seemed to brook no interference.
Clough's high opinion of himself was borne out by his performance on the field. In the North East, he rapidly became a local legend, scoring 250 goals in record time, an achievement that still stands today. He was a hero to everyone, except his fellow professionals.
Chipped. Clough's there, it's in! Oh, what a delightful header!
Even at a young age, you could sense that he wasn't the most popular player in the football club. He was a bit of a loner. He used to breeze into training, breeze off again. Didn't really mix a great deal socially, I don't think, with most of the other players. He was a bit of a strange footballer in a way, yeah.
We went at Charlton once. We were beaten 6-3, because I got 3. I got the 3. And coming back on the train or bus, wherever it was, I said, if we score 5 next week, do you think we'll get a point? And that type of thing didn't go down too well with centre-halves.
Clough's first club, Middlesbrough, tried to keep their young striker happy by offering him the captain's armband. This was too much for some members of the team, who signed a petition demanding he be sacked.
They were jealous of the new up-and-coming upstart, and they got a round robin together, wrote it to the club. I don't know what they said, but they played hell with the lad. He's no good for us, we don't want him, and whatnot, which was absolutely disgraceful.
Despite more success at new club Sunderland, rumours of Clough's attitude reached the national side. Not for the last time in his career, the FA shunned him.
I played for England twice, I think. They'd got a nutter in charge called Sir Walter Winterbottom, and he didn't know a footballer from that picture on the wall. And he didn't know a footballer either, because he only picked me twice.
For his enemies, an icy Boxing Day in 1962 supplied a long overdue comeuppance for Clough's lacerating self-confidence.
It was a dodgy pitch, and I was outside the box. And then I'm trying to keep my eye on it, get it under control, and then I would have looked up to see where I was going to put it. And then a goalkeeper hit me and snapped me in half. And with the ground being hard, I went over him and I hit my head. And momentarily, I must have been unconscious. And all I could do was Bob Stokoe. He was playing centre-half for them. And he was saying, "Get up, you bastard, there's nothing the matter with you." So, since then, I've had something in the children's playroom a big picture of Bob Stokoe. Every time they're naughty, I send them up and they throw darts at his photograph.
Do you still miss the big-time atmosphere?
Not so much a big-time atmosphere. What I do miss, very, very much indeed, and I'm conscious of it all the time, is playing the game.
Damaged ligaments put a stop to Clough's playing career aged 29. For many players this would have meant an end to football, but 6 months later Clough was back, running Hartlepool's, the youngest manager in the league. Immediately he broke new ground by appointing an assistant manager, 36-year-old Peter Taylor.
Peter initially was the best finder of players in the business. He could go to a match and he could look, and I'd be running the club, and Peter'd come back and I'd see him on a Monday and he'd say, he can't play at all. Or he'd come back and say, he's got half a chance, I better have another look at him. And we signed players like that, and we dealt with what we'd got.
In the 60s, the new partnership's methods were revolutionary. Taylor was the scout who found the players, Clough the stern disciplinarian who moulded them.
The very first time I met him, I was going along to Hartlepool because they were starting a youth team, and I went along this night, and he shook all the hands, went along the line and everything, and he came to me and he said, stand up straight. He said, get your shoulders back and get your hair cut, you look like a girl. And that was it, 15-year-old, frightened to death.
Clough and Taylor's modest success with Hartlepool's meant they could take youngsters like McGovern with them when the ambitious pair were offered a better post. Derby County represented a massive challenge. The town's economy was on the slide. Its football club was wedged at the bottom of the second division. Desperate for success, the players were ready to accept Clough's radical methods.
You had this knack in training, you just didn't know what you were going to do next. So therefore you did keep on your toes, you know, and he was a very imposing figure. After so long you look back on it and think, well, he's so strict because he just wanted to get things done. And he wanted them done the way that he wanted them done, and he just barked out the orders and everybody reacted accordingly.
The philosophy I've got is the fact that if there are 100 battles to be won when you take over a new job, you might as well get them all done in the first 3 months if you can. No point in saying, well, we'll take our time, get him out of the road, and then you can clear the decks and get down to what you think is the right thing.
Are we talking about players here now?
Anything.
When Brian came, we didn't know what we were doing until the day before. It was difficult to plan things, and very quickly the people that actually resented it or tried to stand up to him or tried to get their own way or tried to use player power, they were very quickly trodden on and disappeared out of sight fairly quickly. They tell you that fear management doesn't work, but he made it work.
How do you react though when someone, you know, from your playing staff comes in and says, "Boss, I think you're doing this wrongly"?
Good. Well, I ask him which way he thinks it should be done. We get down to it, and then we talk about it for 20 minutes, and then we decide I was right.
At times when you watch him on television, you maybe cringe a little bit of embarrassment that he's outspoken, he's whatever he was, you know, but that's the way he was. I suppose, really, the fact that you're a part of something that's successful, you know, makes it acceptable, really.
O'Hare! It's a goal! A magnificent goal by O'Hare! What an absolute beauty!
Clough and Taylor's blunt methods brought rapid success. Within 2 years, Derby were in the first division and beating established sides like Spurs by record scores.
The progress was so fast, it was almost as if people couldn't keep up with it. Because he knew all the answers and all the motivation was positive and the results were positive, and the players responded because players like playing in winning sides.
The Clough revolution snowballed. Attendance at Derby's baseball ground shot up, and with it the spirit of the whole town.
Suddenly these masses and masses of people were flooding to the games. So the success of Derby, which was essentially the success of Clough and Taylor, the managerial team, was an immense boost to the town. It wasn't just a talking point, it wasn't just something you did on Saturday, it was something that made you walk tall.
Everyone was just totally wrapped up in what was happening down here at the baseball ground. with a football team that had gone from being bottom of the second division, struggling in the dumps, and everybody was doom and gloom. Suddenly the respect of the whole town had improved, and there were even reports that the production at Rolls-Royce, who had a big factory here then, went up about 10% if we won on a Saturday.
Derby ended the 1972 season as league champions, just pipping their arch rivals Leeds. Clough now had the media's full attention, and he rarely disappointed.
Oh, you are a bloody disgrace! Hey, Buzz! For missing the target from there, you want bloody shooting! Oh, it's crap! Oh, it's bloody rubbish! It's rubbish!
Clough was back to the pomp of his playing days. The cameras visiting the club were as interested in the man on the sidelines as the players. But in the boardroom, eyebrows were being raised.
You shouldn't be looking, you should know where it goes.
The attention to Brian and Peter was that they were the best things in sliced bread for football. And there was every day a story where Brian to Barcelona, Brian to Coventry, and it was going on. And so the board were always firefighting. There was always something to be answered. Letters from the FA because Brian had said something in the press, said something on TV. He's very outspoken, very popular.
Clough was at his most outspoken in his newspaper column. No one was safe, but he reserved particular venom for title rivals Leeds and their manager Don Revie.
If I said something about he plays in the Leeds style and people interpreted that as an insult, then that is their problem.
The chairman of the club, Sam Longson, was being told by Alan Hardacre, secretary of the league at the time, hang on, your manager's stepping over the ropes here. There's always a headline, Brian Clough said this, Brian Clough. And Derby were in trouble week in and week out with the authorities.
Then we'll move en bloc.
But Clough continued to put the club at the mercy of the football authorities. As far as he was concerned, Derby's directors simply had to accept controversy as the price of success.
When I first went, I didn't know them, I didn't hear them, I didn't see them. They'd moved a row back from the front row because the supporters were spitting at them. And by the time I'd left, they were loading it up to such an extent they were coming up at 10 to 3 into the director's box and turning around and waving to everybody. And I couldn't stand that.
I think you've got three main problems with the England team. Just three. Sir Alf Ramsey.
Clough was now the biggest figure in the game and fast becoming a national institution.
With him. He makes lots of mistakes, does Alf, but I think his biggest mistake is he doesn't listen to what I'm telling him.
He liked to write his own rules. He was a dictator, he liked control. Probably in the environment of Derby, there were people there on the board who weren't prepared to allow it to happen.
Can we talk to you afterwards?
Less than 18 months after lifting the league trophy, Clough tendered his resignation. But the board called his bluff and willingly accepted.
I don't see it as a battle at all. I resigned and they've accepted it. Peter and I are now officially finished with the Derby County Football Club. Can you tell us why you resigned?
Brian, can you just answer?
That is the last question. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, I want to state quite clearly here that it's not a fight between Brian and myself and Peter. It's a fight between, shall we say, right or wrong.
Can we ask you your reaction then to what Mr. Longson's been saying? One of nausea.
You knew that if ever Cloughie was going to leave Derby, then the town would be in tears. And it was in tears. I've never seen scenes like it. Incredible scene. Could only have happened at a football club where Brian Clough was in charge.
It was mayhem. It was total mayhem. It was remarkable what did happen, how one man could have an effect on the society.
Do you think they can ever replace him?
Never. Never.
Oh, I think it's terrible. You think the club will come to an end, I think.
The dictator had been toppled, but it wasn't just the fans who were distraught. The players he had moulded with his iron grip were ready to fall on their own swords and go on strike.
All the players actually considered going on holiday to Mallorca and flying off when we had a match on the Saturday. You know, that's how strongly we felt about it. We've got the perfect situation. We've got a side here that's capable of going on and beating anybody in the country. And all of a sudden that's been brought to a halt. a shuddering halt.
In the end, the players did turn up for their first game without Clough, and so, to the director's horror, did Clough himself. Having stirred things up at Derby, he then drove down to London to continue the war on national television.
I think a lot of people will wonder perhaps what on earth you were doing there at the ground today, Brian, because you have, after all, resigned.
Yes, I went along to just say a final so long to everybody. I rang the players at lunchtime, actually, had a chat to one or two of them, wished them good luck. It was essential we win today. Absolutely essential.
Yes, you say we, but I mean you're no longer part of them, Brian.
No, well, I'm part of them. Perhaps I'm not part of the club. I'm 6.5 years part of them.
Yes.
And, you know, it'll take me, if, for example, I don't go back, it'll take me 12 months to get it even out of my system.
Protests continued for over a month after the resignation, but the board refused to budge. Clough's managerial career, like his playing days, had come to an unceremonious halt. For all his brilliance, it seemed that he was, perhaps, just a flash in the pan.
Clough has views on everything and could win a shouting match with Castro. But at home, the home he sees all too rarely, he's a different man. It's here that he reflects on what all this frenetic rat race is about.
I haven't been in the game 5 minutes at the managerial level. The two clubs I've been to, Hartlepool and to Derby, I don't seem to have had 5 minutes. Now, I don't think it's like this all the time. If I thought it was like it all the time, then I certainly wouldn't stand for it.
After the bitter experiences of Derby, Brian Clough took a sabbatical, spending more time with his wife, Barbara, and 3 children. And though he took another job at 3rd Division Brighton, he seemed to be coasting, often leaving his perennial assistant Peter Taylor in charge as the team was beaten by record scores. Seemingly of more concern to the working-class lad from the northeast was the stirring political scene of 1974. Putting his acerbic style at the service of the Labour Party in Derby, his public profile increased still further.
They say I'm arrogant because they say I'm a socialist. You know, what the hell is being arrogant about being a socialist? And they say, well, you know, you shouldn't say it on television. And I say, well, why not?
The words came tumbling out. He was a more articulate version of Johnny Prescott, in that, you know, the words were perfectly formed. And that's what made him, in his heyday, a terrific football commentator on the radio. Yes, there was sometimes exaggeration and pretty raw language, but the overall impression was that tumble of enthusiasm.
We have X number of MPs in the House of Commons, and if you took a cross-section of the public, or any particular profession, I do not think you would find so many dishonest men per 1,000.
And I thought occasionally of going along to consult my old friend, who I think is pretty well the best man in the business, Brian Clough. He's pretty good at picking teams.
What he wanted to see was a fair, decent society. He wanted to see, using his own influence and the rest, to carry that forward, and he was as much interested in that as he was with any the football in a kind of way, although he was, of course, an absolute master in teaching the football, but he was also trying to teach a new kind of spirit in the community as well. And it was an amalgamation of the two things. One of the best socialists I ever met in my life, as well as a real master of the game.
How come we can't get everybody in work with talent? We've got enough shithouses in work without talent.
Clough's political forays continued throughout his life. He was even considered as a prospective Labour MP in 1979. But in 1974 it was football, not politics, that in the end claimed him. Don Revie, his biggest rival, had moved from the newly crowned league champions Leeds United to become England manager. While Peter Taylor decided to stay on at Brighton, Clough answered the call from Elland Road. And so began one of football's most bizarre managerial tenures.
everybody at the club was totally shocked when they heard the name Brian Clough, because if you'd have asked anybody probably in the whole country, one person Leeds wouldn't have gone for would have been Brian at the time.
It was a marriage made in hell, really. I mean, Clough should never. I mean, it was an unbelievable decision.
Clough had always reserved particular contempt for Leeds.
We've got to be very careful of the type of things I say, but, you know, football had a bad week last week. The goodies lost and the cheats won.
His constant berating of their manager and their tough style of play did not endear him to many Yorkshiremen.
You see, the problem was with Revie and with Clough, I mean, they were so far apart in their lines of thinking. You know, they hated each other's guts. They were always at each other's throats.
The last 4 or 5 years, we've been the most entertaining side by crowd entertainment and topping charts with national newspapers and television.
Also, Don, the disciplinary chart.
The disciplinary chart...
You topped that.
No, that's not true. It wasn't 100% right, I will agree.
Sorry?
It wasn't 100% right. Discipline.
The first thing he did was ask for all the furniture that Don had in his office to be taken away, because he wouldn't sit on the chair that he'd sat on, he wouldn't have a desk there that he'd had. And then we realised that he really did hate Don and the setup at Leeds.
We were 2 or 3 days training, and we didn't see him, you know. And then we didn't know what was happening. We wanted somebody to give us some guidance as to what to do. And then about 3 or 4 days later, we had this team meeting.
And he said, right, he said, you might have wondered why I haven't said a lot. He said, I wanted to make my own impressions of the club. I wanted to see things without anybody talking to me and telling me this and that, which sounded reasonable. And then his next words were, but before I start working with you lot, called us a lot, there's something I've got to tell you what I think about you all. And then he launched into a personal attack on every player.
I said, we'll have to cut this harassing of referees out, because they perfected it, Leeds did. Anytime there was a free kick given against Leeds, you could never see the referee for white shirts round him, shoving him, barging him, and all sorts. They perfected it, and it was cheating.
His finishing gambit was, and finally, you've won all the trophies, all the domestic trophies, you've won European competitions, but as far as I'm concerned, you can throw all your medals in the bin because you never won one of them fairly.
You know, because you cheated for those, you know, and that's not a thing to say to probably 15, 16 internationals.
Clough's first game in charge was the 1974 Charity Shield. While Don Revie looked on, the Leeds players made it clear that they intended to stick to tried and trusted methods. Without the support of his old partner, Clough cut an increasingly isolated figure at Leeds.
If Taylor wasn't going with him, then he shouldn't have gone to Leeds, because he would tell Brian the one to watch out for. Don't trust that one, not sure about him, he's all right, and I'll work him out in this time tomorrow.
Desperate for allies, Clough brought in some familiar faces from Derby. McGovern and O'Hare were followed by Duncan Mackenzie, who found he was expected to do more than score goals.
Well, Brian Clough, you see, asked me more or less to mark his card about what was going on behind the scenes with the players, what they were saying about him. I mean, I can understand that. That's clever play, isn't it, for him to ask me. But I did turn around and say to him, I said, no, I said, you got the wrong one. I said, you know, I said, for starters, I said, they've said nothing untoward about you. I didn't exactly tell him the truth, no. I mean, the players were obviously very anti-Brian Clough this time, very anti-Brian Clough.
The players at Leeds just didn't accept that he was a good manager. Couldn't see how he could be a good manager. And they used to say, well, was he like this at Derby? I said, yeah, he was just the same at Derby. And they must have been amazed how he actually won things at Derby or be so successful.
Seized on by Tuer, away from Hunter. He's got Bell on his right. Bell coming in now. Beautiful goal.
6 games into the season and the champions had only won once. A crisis meeting was called between the players, Clough and Chairman Sam Bolton. Clough was about to find himself on the wrong end of another players' revolt.
Now you can cut the atmosphere with a knife. And Sam Bolton started. He started off with Cloughie. And it was like, Mr. Clough, Mr. Clough, players don't take right kindly to thee. What's thou got to say for thyself, Mr. Clough? Now, you can't believe Clough would ever be without a word, but he wouldn't. He just shook his head. He couldn't believe he was involved in this. And he invited the players to comment.
We told them, you know, Brian doesn't like Leeds United, he doesn't like the players, and he's insulted everybody, but they'd appointed him, so it was up to them to make a decision. We never actually said we wanted Brian Clough out of the club at any time.
I can't sit here now and say, no, I didn't. I wanted him to leave because I didn't think he was good for the club.
I said, just give it a bit longer, it'll change. He said, well, have a little think about it. So I twigged then he'd made his mind up.
After that meeting, he was sacked.
After only 44 days, Clough was out of his job, and waiting for a showdown with him was his old enemy, Don Revie.
But why? Why did he come from Brighton to Leeds to take it over when you'd criticised them so much and said we should be in the second division for this and we should do this and we should do that? Why do you take the job?
Well, because I thought it was the best job in the country.
Of course it was the best job.
I was taking over the league champions.
Yeah, you were taking over the league champion. You were taking over the best bunch of players that you've ever seen.
Well, I didn't know about the players, Don. I wanted to do something you hadn't done. And I said, I want to win the league, but I want to win it better. Now, there is no other reply to that question.
No, but
because you had won the league.
Yeah, but there's no way you could win it better.
Why not?
No.
But that's the only hope I've got.
We'd only lost 4 matches. And
but I can only lose 3.
No.
I tried to do things too quickly, simple as that. But that was the way I was. If I wanted to do something, I did it. Right or wrong, I did it. I thought it was always right.
Why is he going, Mr. Cousins? I mean, there is no answer to that question.
Because we've been spoilt by Don Revie.
Seemingly this was Clough's nadir. A year previously he was a great football manager with a big head. Now he was only the latter. If ever Clough's cocky persona was knocked, it was in 1974. The top clubs were now no longer interested in a man who had failed at Brighton and Leeds.
I think his confidence certainly had been knocked a little bit by his experience at Leeds. You know, this guy who I suppose he felt that nobody could knock him down, and maybe a little bit self-doubt. You know, maybe he wasn't as good a manager as he thought he was.
I'd got a house in Leeds, I'd got a house in Brighton, and I got one in Derby. And I turned around to my missus one night in bed and I said, what am I? I said, am I a bloody Football League manager or a property developer? I said, I've got 3 houses and I'm out of work.
Don't get run over, lads, whatever you do.
But by January 1975, Clough was back in work and back in the second division with another struggling club, Nottingham Forest. What he was to achieve there would put all past triumphs and disasters in the shade. When Brian Clough returned to football management after the debacle at Leeds, some wondered whether the passion burned as fiercely as before.
It would be very impolite of me to say he was going through the motions, but if he'd experienced him before, as I had, from being 15 years of age, I thought there's definitely something missing from his approach, which was very quickly corrected when Peter Taylor joined him, because then we just went off again.
Clough was quick to bring stalwarts like John McGovern with him to Forest, but once again his most important signing was Peter Taylor. Apart, neither had prospered. Now the pairing that had turned second division Derby into English champions were back at square one again.
My brothers. Whenever we have a crisis, he never fails me. And consequently we thought that together we could have success quicker together than we could individually.
There's no doubt that Clough loved Taylor. He really did. He understood him. He could be annoyed by Peter Taylor very, very quickly, but overall he knew that the two of them together were very, very good for each other.
Clough's methods had not changed, but unlike Leeds, he was now dealing with young and malleable players who appreciated his simple philosophy.
he'd say, coaching. Don't talk to me about coaching. This is coaching, Alan. And he'd take you down to the training ground. He'd stand with his stick and he'd shout, hit the target. Hit the target. Hit the target. That's coaching.
Centre-halves, their job was to head the ball. Full-backs, their job was to tackle and get the ball. Outside rights, outside lefts, their job was to take people on and get crosses in. You know, strikers, your job is to get your head to it, get your foot to it, and get it in the back of the net. Midfield players, you go up and down, and it was so simple.
When he speaks to people, because that's his greatest gift, speaking to people, making them listen, but making everything that he says seem crystal clear to ordinary working men, which footballers are. So if you make things crystal clear to ordinary working men and you get them to work hard, you find that you've got a fantastic product there.
Like Derby before, within 2 seasons Forest were in the First Division. Clough was casting a spell that would propel them to unfeasible heights.
Imagine the dressing room with 14, 15 players in, quiet, 15 minutes, the stadium's full, everybody's got their eyes closed and they're like this. And he starts singing, Fly Me to the Moon. I'm a good singer, lads, aren't I? Aren't I a good singer, lads? But you're good players. You're brilliant players. That's why you play for me. And you're going to go out there and you're going to make your grandmas and your granddads and your wives and your girlfriends and some of you, your kids, you're going to make them feel proud because you're good players. And you could see the lads. You're good players, lads. And we're going to win today, aren't we? Yes, boss. We're going to win today, aren't we? We're going to win today, aren't we? And they do it like that and they go out 10 foot tall.
Looks for Woodcock, comes across now for Robertson. Goal number 3, John Robertson.
It was one of them that you wanted to run your socks off for. I mean, whenever I'd done anything good, he'd put this little sign up like that and he'd call my name and I'd turn around. And that made me feel, really, give me that ball again. Let me have another go at this fullback.
Out. Now Battles. Going all the way, Battles!
He always used to say, forget about the opposition, you do your job, don't worry about them. They're not good enough to beat you. And that's what we went out and did.
And here's Robertson. Oh, he's sending Naylor one way, then the other. Oh, and a brilliant goal by Robertson.
Other aspects of the Clough method were even more unorthodox and will be frowned upon in the modern game.
I've seen Brian give the lads a whiskey and a brandy before they go out to play a big game. And I've seen players at pre-match meals, important games at lunchtime, and he's got bottles of wine on the table just to relax them before they go to bed.
I think we probably had 18 bottles of wine between us. We were told to come down for a drink. We had to come down, and we couldn't go to bed until he said.
Before big finals, he'd have them locked in a room and make them drink so they'd sleep. But he was right. It did relax them, and they played well.
So Robertson better get on with this.
By April 1978, the league trophy was being presented to the team of ne'er-do-wells who had pipped Liverpool for the championship. Brian Clough, with Peter Taylor alongside him, had become only the second manager in the history of the game to win the league with 2 different clubs.
They underestimated us. It's the best way to go into anything, when they think they're going to win. There's nought certain in this life, not in football.
Once again, Clough had bounced back from adversity. Now he was poised to take the final step that would crown his career. His old rival, Don Revie, had failed as England manager and scuttled off to a highly paid job in the Middle East.
A bit cold, isn't it?
Despite his past run-ins with the FA, they were obliged to interview Clough when it became clear he was the people's choice for the job.
Do you feel that what you've done for Forest you could do with the England side?
I think managing a side, whether it's England, Forest or Hartlepool, that's where Peter and I started, it is the same thing. Management's essential in any football club, however big or however small.
and I feel the Football Association should have the best manager. And please don't ask me who that is.
They were scared stiff of him. Absolutely scared stiff of his style, his way of management. Take out the equation that he was so successful. That's what they should have been looking at.
In the end, fear triumphed at Lancaster Gate, and Clough was passed over.
I think they gave it wrong, Greenwood. Typical Football Association decision. Ron, charming man. Wouldn't hurt a fly. Couldn't fall out with his wife to save his life. And was a nice man. They didn't want any trouble. They didn't want me. They thought they were shrewd enough to think that I was going to take over the FA, which I was going to. I'd have taken them over lock, stock and barrel.
If the bitter Clough wanted to show two fingers to the FA, he went about it in exactly the right way. While the England team stumbled on, he coolly led his collection of misfits to the 1979 European Cup final against Malmo.
The first time we've seen them attack them, and there's Francis! Well, that's what I wanted to see Robertson do.
Less than 3 years before, virtually the same set of players had been wallowing in the second division. Now Clough had made them champions of Europe, using bizarrely relaxed methods.
I had philosophy. We used to treat European trips as a holiday. Our bread and butter was the league. That was hard. But when we used to go to Lisbon, Holland, anywhere we did have to go to, we treated it like a holiday. It was a change. And we didn't train.
The Clough system brought Forest back to the final again the following year. Their opponents were the German champions Hamburg and European Footballer of the Year Kevin Keegan. Clough was unimpressed.
Before we went, I said to them, I don't care how we play, just win.
Well, he's gone past him on the inside there. And still Robertson getting his shot in. And
John Robertson's goal clinched back-to-back European Cups not only for Clough, but the captain of the side who had been with Clough since he was 15.
Lifting a cup of that importance twice. It doesn't come close to holding my son in my arms for the first time, but it's the closest feeling I've ever had in my career. I was just grateful to be born in the same lifetime as someone with the ability that Clough's got. But to be part of the success that he's had, I'll always be extremely grateful for. And it was a hell of a ride.
Clough had defied the laws of gravity. He'd taken a provincial team to unfeasible heights. The challenge now was to keep them there. For the first time, Clough and Taylor had real money to spend. Old faithfuls like John McGovern were replaced by £1 million mistakes like Justin Fashanu. For Peter Taylor, the results were heartbreaking.
I don't think he was happy with these players that he'd brought into the club. He was trying to replace the old players of the European days with new players because he knew you needed fresh blood. And I don't think he achieved that.
For many weeks now, I don't believe I've been doing justice to the partnership, and I certainly haven't been doing justice to Nottingham Forest the way I felt. And consequently, after a great deal of thought, there was no option. I wanted to take an early retirement, and that's exactly what I've done.
I wouldn't say that exactly half of the Clough effectiveness walked through the door the day Peter walked out, but a big percentage of it did. I think that was the beginning of the end of the story.
I didn't want him to retire. He used to say, when you get shot at me, he said, you'll miss me. And I said, I know I will. He said, you won't laugh as much. And I didn't.
Clough and Taylor initially parted on good terms, but the relationship was to turn sour within months, when Taylor got the urge to try his hand at management out of the Clough shadow at their old club, Derby. Adding insult to injury, he poached John Robertson from the Forest side.
You talked to Brian about the signing at all?
No. Robertson was free for me to negotiate with last Friday. and I didn't have to speak to anyone other than the player.
And I went on the phone to my wife and she said that John Robertson signed for Derby. And he went to the next telephone booth and heard the same story. Went to the bar and bought a bottle of whiskey and came back and slammed it on the table and said, never ever talk to Peter Taylor ever again in my life. And he never did.
The relationship was severed permanently when Clough launched one of his now familiar broadsides, with this time Taylor as his target.
I can't put it into words.
Is that because you feel too emotional
so
about
strongly,
it?
not emotional, strongly. I can't put it into words. You'd never get it on the screen in any case.
He said if he was on fire on the motorway, on the A52, he wouldn't stop his car to put it out. That was one of his sayings, which we used to hurt a little bit, but that's how bitter he was at the time.
Here they were at loggerheads over a football issue, for heaven's sake, over the transfer of a player who'd already given of his best days for Nottingham Forest anyway. Very sad. And it was never really healed either, before Peter died.
I remember when Peter died, I got a phone call in my office and Brian wasn't in that day, he was at home. And I rang him to tell him. And he didn't answer, he just put the phone down. And I would imagine he cried his eyes out, because that's how he was.
Although he said he would never speak to Peter, he still felt a lot about him. And when he died, he did go to the funeral. I think that started the drinking. He liked to drink. He liked to drink. At times, he drank a little too much, which we all did. We all did. But it became an everyday thing with him. It was sad, really. And unfortunately, it affected Brian more than most.
Clough's behaviour became increasingly erratic during the 80s. He was fined and banned from the touchline for punching fans who had invaded the pitch. With his son Nigel now playing for him, Forest still managed respectable league positions, but Clough's simple methods, once revolutionary, were becoming dated. Loyal staff covered for him.
Because of the football side of things, tactically was developing, and he didn't believe in it. He believed in motivation. But sometimes you did have to know whether they played 4-4-2 or whether they played with 3 at the back and 5 in midfield and 2 stuck up front, And we used to secretly find that out, and first team coach would pass it on to the skipper. But they had so much respect for him that he never found out.
Despite the problems, Forest reached the FA Cup final in 1991. Victory at Wembley would have made the perfect end to a great career. The opponents were Spurs, and England's most successful manager was to be pitted against England's most outstanding player. On the day, it was the player who, for all the wrong reasons, grabbed the headlines.
How Gascoigne was not sent off on that match, I will never, ever know. It'll be a mystery for the rest of my life. Because he kicked a lad called Gary Parker, and a lad called Gary Charles, and in the tunnel. He was that, I didn't dare turn around. I think he would have tried to whack me.
Injury finally put paid to Gascoigne's desperate dreams of glory. And an own goal in extra time did the same for Clough's fairy tale ending.
I genuinely do think if he'd won that one, he would have retired then. Because his health wasn't too good then, at the cup final and after the cup final, Brian obviously, drunk too much. And that affected his health. There's no doubt about that. And it would be foolish, not to say that it didn't affect him, because it did affect him.
Excuse me. I'm 57. I've been in football 40 years now. Even for an old so-and-so like me. That's a long time, pal.
He didn't know what, he really didn't know what he was doing at that stage. He was on a different planet, and the guy was... I had not seen him for a number of years, and I couldn't believe how much downhill he'd gone,
Oh, now then, this drinks cabinet is a shambles, and Cloughy is the man to knock you back into shape. Let's start with you, Whiskey. I want you to take up a position in the middle. Grand Marnier, going to push you right back, and I want you to stay there till Christmas.
The final blow came from a predictable direction. In April 1993, with Forest struggling to avoid relegation, club director Chris Wotton went public, calling Clough a drunk and claiming that there had been a coup to sack him.
I don't know what he talking about me drinking about was because he was never at the ground. The only thing he did was he got me a shotgun. And he gave me it and laid it on the ground, and it was a good shotgun, actually. But I was only shooting rabbits with it. I should have fucking shot him.
At a meeting that I've had with him this morning, it has been agreed that Brian will retire at the end of this season.
Could you excuse me, and thank you for asking me to be interviewed, and I'll go back to Barbara and my grandchildren.
It's been a pleasure knowing you, sir.
John, it's a cuddle Grandad wants. Oh, boy, I've got you.
Can you just leave the property, please?
Clough's retirement from football did not mean an end to controversy. His reputation as one of the most successful managers in the modern game was forgotten when allegations were made about his business conduct.
Can we have a brief word, please? Quite serious allegations. What do you have to say in reaction to those?
The former Nottingham Forest manager has been charged with misconduct by the Football Association.
Following an inquiry, the FA charged him over cash payments made during the transfer of Teddy Sheringham from Forest to Spurs. Clough always denied the charges, and the FA let them drop because of his ill health.
I was there 6 minutes. Now, you can only be there 6 minutes when you know you've not done anything wrong.
I just hope he gets well again, which he has been over this last couple of years. He's been much better, and I hope he starts enjoying his life again.
It was always predictable that Clough's career would end in controversy rather than glory. He belonged to an era in which mavericks rather than accountants set the footballing agenda. Aged 65, Clough now lives in Derby. He says he no longer drinks, but his taste for controversy is as strong as ever.
The Frenchman comes on from Arsenal. The first thing I'd say to him was, well, I'm not keen on the French for a start. You're not keen on us, because I don't think French like us. I said, and we got out of the shit with 2 wars, so don't come this bloody clever stuff with me. Because we did. I don't like Germans either, because they shot me dad. There's nothing the matter with that. I would have problems with the foreign players, because they wouldn't be able to understand me, and I certainly can't speak half of their languages. But there's one word they all understand, wherever they come from. Off. They understand that. But the question was... What was the question?